Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Mag Retelewski. Mag is the driving force behind Clarteza, an innovation consultancy dedicated to amplifying growth through deep consumer understanding rooted in psychology and neuroscience. Basically, she helps companies innovate. With 20 years of experience as an innovation strategist, Mag has advised Fortune 500 and mid-sized companies, including brands like Nestlé, Gallo, SC Johnson, Honest Company, Purina, and Blue Diamond Growers, and many, many others. Her passion for understanding people fuels her work, delivering insights that inspire impactful solutions across industries and the globe. She has worked in the US, Europe, Asia, South America, and Africa, solving a wide range of problems and working with a wide range of products and services and experiences. And that is the thing I just want to prime everybody with as they jump into this. We talk a lot about how to innovate and build products, but what we talk about in here applies just as much to an internal leader trying to build a new experience for their team or develop a new way of working or solve a new problem internally, as well as solving new problems, building new services, all the human experience side of work stuff. This applies just as much. So this was really, really fun. Mag is fantastic. Really hope you enjoy this conversation. Here is Mag Retelewski. Mag, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
This is fun. I always like when friends of friends and guests of guests come on the show. And one of my former guests, Elise Powers, didn't reach out. She had posted something that included you and me and a number of other people. And I looked at your work and thought, man, that looks really interesting. And just kind of reached out and said, hey, you want to talk about a podcast? And here we are. So I'm excited to jump in. There's a lot to what it is that you do. So when somebody asks you, what do you do? What's your answer?
It depends on how much time I have. Again,
okay.
Look to the complexity that you have mentioned.
We got time here.
There you go, right? I help companies innovate. That's the most important message that I want to make sure that's clear. But the way I do that and the way my team does it is we analyze human behavior, as I have a true passion for understanding people. In reality, I'm just curious why people do what they do. And in context of innovation, that's particularly important because if you are trying to solve a problem for a consumer, you want to understand where the frustration is, what doesn't work for them currently, and how can the brand or the product or a solution that they currently have or they're thinking of launching in the market can fill that need. It's also important to pay attention to what really works well, how the product that is already in the market delights people. So you can pay attention to that. So that is really in essence of the way the innovation works, is understanding people. And based on that, looking for the insights, what it is that really, where the company can find the niche with their product or service to fill that need.
This might be a weird question. How do you define innovation?
It's interesting. This is innovation. But let's start with creativity first.
Okay. I like this answer already. Yeah.
So creativity is really sort of rearranging different elements, whether they're in your brain or whether they're in, some areas in the libraries that you have, and creating something new out of it that's useful and novel, right? And innovation is a step further in creating those products, physically making them or making a better version of them and launching them in the market.
I like that. I don't hear creativity linked to innovation a lot. I mean, obviously, when you think about it, in order to innovate, you have to be creative. But to start at the basis of creativity, I think is a good framework for innovation. So when it comes to your work, what kinds of innovation are you doing? Like, what a company comes to you with what kind of a problem to solve?
So we have had over the years a range of fascinating challenges and issues companies came to us with. One could be as simple as our brand sales are tanking. They're not doing really well. What can we do? Or the category is shrinking. What can we do to either change the trajectory of our brand or potentially save the category? So that could be one example. And another one would be, let's say a brand comes to us and say, we want to expand internationally. We think the product that we have here in the US would do really well in multiple different countries around the world. That said, we want to make sure it's relevant, it's put in the right cultural settings, so we have the highest chance of success. So we help to craft the concept or a product idea, tested in a variety of different countries. We have tested many different products, sometimes 20 to 25 different countries at the same time. It's fascinating to get the insights and the cultural settings. It's really fascinating. And we've done some work, just a third type of example that, for example, the company comes into us and says, we have done all the research. We have, in fact, more data that we can handle. We are overwhelmed with everything that we have done so far. Can you help us put some clarity behind it? So we would do a sort of analysis of all the research that they've done to date, organize it in such a way that we have some level of clarity. And then from that point on, we can start thinking about opportunities in terms of territory, sort of the groups of areas where the companies can innovate. And within those territories, then we start thinking about specific products. And the products concepts could be anything from product testing to where you already have sort of a prototype of a product that you want to test, or a very seed of an idea that we want to test in multiple markets or multiple demographics.
Okay. All right. This is going to be fun to pick apart now. So let's start at the beginning. Somebody comes to you, they have a problem set that they want you to work on. Where do you begin? Like, how do you start to organize around a problem?
This is a great question and an important one. First and foremost, we meet our clients where they are. Sometimes they have the research, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a hypothesis, sometimes they don't. They just see with sales, for example, what's going on in the market, right? So it could be a variety of different ways of approaching that type of situation. If they have a hypothesis, it's always great to make sure that we hear that hypothesis and the real problem that they are trying to solve from a variety of different angles. And from that point on, we would engage with multiple stakeholders within the company. It could be anybody from research and development, from sales, from marketing, insights, strategy, you name it. So understanding from a variety of angles what it is that the company is struggling with or the hypothesis that may have. And it really...
Can I just pause you right there on the hypothesis piece? Because a question on that is, like, somebody has a hypothesis and they come to you, they say, I think we need to go in this path.
Yes.
How important is it to forget your hypothesis? And like can having a hypothesis actually hurt you in the beginning of this is, I guess, what I want to ask. Because so much of what I've read about design is making sure you have the right problem to begin with.
Super important.
Having a hypothesis is fine, but it would seem to me like you have to be willing to let go of that. Okay, here's my hypothesis. Now let's let it go and let's go see what's really happening in that part of the market. And then does what we find match up to that hypothesis?
Tremendously important point you raised. So the way we ground the team to say, okay, it's great to have a hypothesis. We want to understand the variety of problems. As I described, even when we talk to stakeholders, you realize that everybody looks at the same issue very differently. Mm-hmm. So that starts at the beginning, right? And there are variation of different points of view on a situation. So that's number one. And number two, it would be super important to make sure that everybody understands that we're here to learn, not to win per se, right? there is a very clear distinction. It's just, okay, we have a specific hypothesis and we would do all the types of questions that would lead us to that hypothesis. And with the psychology background, I know which question may be leading you to that specific outcome versus not, right? So having that understanding with a team to make sure that they are fully prepared for what's to come rather than having a very clear, crisp answer. Not every organization is as open to that as you might imagine.
Yeah, not shocking.
Right. Yeah. I just want to answer. Just can you give me yes or no?
Yeah. When you say open to learning versus winning,
yes,
winning in this case means my hypothesis has to be right.
Correct.
Yeah. It's not about being right. It's about getting it right.
Getting it right. Or another way of looking at it, they might have a very specific type of solution in mind. They think they know the consumer really well, and the outcomes are not what they expected.
Do you have an example of one of those that you could share?
I'd have to think about it a little bit more simply because
you don't have to name names.
I can't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this was a European company that we worked with, and they had a coffee machine. And they wanted to launch it in the US. They've tried it twice. And they said, clearly the Americans don't know anything about coffee. Which on many levels, that was an issue for me.
Yeah. Doesn't
right?
seem true. Yeah.
That's right. But here's the interesting part. I see it from both ways. I work with multinational companies, both that have many offices around the world. So depending on where the headquarters is, this is where the headquarters and the people within headquarters thinks the truth lies.
Yeah.
Right? So I see it from both sides. So this doesn't surprise me necessarily. But anyway, so we've had a situation where the client said, clearly we don't know how the market in the US is not ready for us. That was essentially the response. But we're going to give it one more time, one last try. If you can help us really understand, is it the consumer that is an issue? Is it the category that isn't, that the category is not ready? Or is it the product, the solution that we have? And it was a coffee machine, very fancy coffee machine. And my question was, are you ready for the people to actually play with your product and try it and test it and taste it? And because when they described it, all they've done, the research to date was all about description, the pictures of, anything that you have with regards to coffee machine. And coffee machines are in the US specifically, that the market at the time wasn't in fact as well developed, right? So people did not have a clear understanding what a great coffee might taste like from a specific type of the coffee machine. So we organize a qualitative exploratory type study, and those kinds of questions where, you sort of want to understand the overall behavior. You want to understand the reasons behind the behavior. You want to have people play with the product so you really understand where the issue is, right? So we brought in everybody, including the coffee aficionados, who from the beginning said, there's no way I'm going to be drinking this coffee from this coffee machine. I'm sure it's going to be crap, kind of thing, right? And I said, great, let's pull those coffee machines into the room. Let's have them play with them. Coffee machines were beautiful. They looked great. They were very, very exciting. We brought in very clear cups to see how the coffee, layers looked like, right? So immediately the sensorial element was turned on. People's eyes opened up. They were, in the room. It was really, really exciting. They picked it up and they were like, oh my God, I've never had a coffee like that before. And all of a sudden, everybody started to share in the room. And I was like, oh no, please don't share the coffee that you just consumed. Because everybody was so excited. When people are surprised with anything, even consumers, if you get to see that, their dopamine level goes up. They're excited. They want to share it. They were convinced within minutes of trying. And it was really interesting for us because for us to convince this client to bring the products, they said, no, why would we need that? It's just the market isn't ready. I'm like, this is your last try, last chance. Let's have people try it. It changed the strategy completely for the launch. It was experiential roadshow events, and the brand took off big time. It was really, really exciting to see. People were buying not even one coffee machines, but multiple for gifts because they were beautiful, exciting, and great tasting. So yeah, so it wasn't the consumer. It was the research, how they attempted that wasn't working.
That's a great point, and transitions. It pulls us out of that rabbit hole right into the next one I wanted to go into, which is, how do we make sure we're asking the right questions? Like, how do we get out of our own sort of natural thought patterns and find those new angles?
This is a fascinating topic for me on two levels. Having the right questions is so important. You don't always have the privilege of knowing that you ask the right questions, especially if you create a survey that's closed-ended and people just respond and, you sort of get some of the insights, but not fully. In qualitative and exploratory type questions or open-ended questions, it's really, really exciting to see when people sort of unlock, right? In those situations, I look for any emotions associated with it, right? So if people are super excited about or something, frustrated, or talk about something that's super important to them in context of the product or a category. So I really like asking those questions. So in the last few years, we in fact started to move the elements of those bigger questions, more provocative questions, from the qualitative setting into quantitative setting, meaning where we have 200 and 300 responses that we can see the open-ended answers that are really providing a lot of insight. And pretty quickly where you have the right question because people have so much to say that, that you almost have to manage the time, and the response is layered. It's interesting, and it always leads to something surprising.
So what are the characteristics of a good question?
There are a variety of different questions, but let me step back a bit. We as humans do not realize why we do what we do to begin with.
Yeah, amen.
Right?
Yeah.
80 to 90% of the things we do, this is just how we're designed, is automatic, unconscious, or subconscious, right?
Yeah.
So if you ask a simple question in a very straightforward way, that's one way, one type of answer. But if you're able to sort of start peeling the onion just a little bit to understand what are the emotional drivers behind why people do what they do, it really makes a difference. I actually think this is going to be a good example to sort of demonstrate. A client of ours came to us and said, we want to understand how can we build our client base. It was a dance company, and they wanted to increase the number of subscribers. It was an online platform, and they wanted to increase the number of subscribers. One of the most important things when it comes to physical exercise and dance in particular is, well, it's an activity. It's, it's fun. It's, exciting. But we asked a question: what does dance mean to you? And we've asked it first in the qualitative setting, sort of, one-on-one, like you and I having a conversation right now. And it was always this pause.
Yeah.
And then we felt like we had a soul, sort of insight into, a human soul. It was fascinating. It was not only that it was life-changing for many, it was exciting, was activity that really changed people's lives. And when we started to look at the data, we noticed something that came through that we did not expect. When we split the data into two groups, one is sort of under 35 and one is over 35, something that I would have not come up with on my own, sort of in pre-coded type responses, right? If you say, what does dance mean to you? Oh, it's joy, it's exercise, this. I would have not come up with this response. It came up as healing.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I started looking into the data, what happened is it made sense to me. After 35, all of us have had, well, those over 35 had some experiences that were, difficult, traumatic, and so on. And dance was the outlet to heal those elements in people's souls, which was fascinating. When we looked at the under 35 years old, they were driven by challenge. They were driven by, I want to win the, competitive setting of sorts in a ballroom dance competition, for example. So it was a very different way of talking to the audiences. The company changed the positioning and the communication to make sure that is leveraged, and it changed trajectory of that company.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that doesn't surprise me. My wife is a professional ballet dancer. And
that's incredible.
Yeah. And I have a friend who in college kind of majored in dance therapy. So yes. The fact when you said healing, that makes a lot of sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. So one of the papers I'm going to digress for just a minute, was working on the role of dance on the brain, or the neuroplasticity of the brain. And it's incredible the impact it has on the brain.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an animalistic, emotional, spiritual part of who we are.
Yes. Yeah. It was just sort of one of the first ways we communicated.
Yeah. Primal. That's the word I was looking for.
Primal.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Fascinating. So you've kind of alluded to this, and I know you may have asked me to take this question out, but I wanted to ask, I'm just fascinated by this question. I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. So it's one thing to go out and do all this research, right? You can do it in a focus group. You can do it in a survey. There's all this different ways that you can go collect information. And for anyone who's listened to this show, there's a bunch of episodes where we talk about all these different ways to go out and sort of get this information. You get this qualitative stuff back. Like, how are you sifting through it? What are you doing with the research? Like, what is your mindset as you're reviewing this when it comes to innovation or like defining the problem? Because I think it's one thing to be like, go do all this research, and then you get all the research and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. Let's just go back to what we thought the problem was before. So how do you bridge those two things, if that makes sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And it is an art and a science in a true sense of the word when it comes to qualitative. And number one, we look for themes. And themes are independent of what your hypothesis is. It's just you're looking for different areas that sort of come up and emerge. The second thing that we have been doing, and I'm going to weave in an element of technology here. We have been using AI for qualitative type responses, natural language processing tool that has been developed by MIT Media Lab. We've been using this for several years, and it is something that was a game changer for us, because there's one thing about a human looking at a qualitative research with biases and, sort of a preconceived notion on what might you find, versus not. And it's an important element. Human element is tremendously valuable in this situation. But what AI does is looks at every single word that's been mentioned by everybody, whether it is in one-on-one settings or whether it's an open-ended questions across 300 people. We're able to look at what word is associated with another word. How can we look at clusters of information? What's positive versus what's negative? What are the drivers of emotional context, right? So this is something that we have been using for years, and it's exciting now that I don't have to explain what AI is to people.
Are you able to share what that tool is? Like, is that a tool people could go access on their own?
This is, it is, but it's a license that you would need to acquire. So and it takes a little bit of a time, and we have a method to sort of follow this. So it's not as straightforward as one might say.
It's not just plug and play.
Yeah. Not a plug and play.
Okay.
Which is why, in fact, we have learned to work with this tool for the last 5 years to really understand and push the boundaries of it, because clients, big companies, they just don't have the time and the bandwidth to be able to, tinker and play and move the data from one place to another. Just, you need almost a data scientist to have the knowledge. But yes,
Got it.
This is fascinating. So my point is, when you look at these kinds of things, so let me give you an example. This is going to be an interesting one, where we were working on a wine category, and it was a country in Europe that an American company was trying to move their products. And they said, well, in this country, clearly people only consume sweet wines. And to me, that seemed very oversimplified. There is not a country that everybody's, that we're not all the same, regardless of which country you're looking at. And you asked about what's the element of innovation? How do you look for it? If you're looking at the data and your identity is not tied to the data specifically, or the outcome to the data, you look at the information as a scientist. Oh, this is interesting, right? Oh, this is just your fate is not determined by how the data sort of comes out. And that's the best way to look at any information to begin with. So what happened is we looked at the data in different language, and we realized that people were struggling with the vocabulary for the word smooth. It wasn't, so their first associated word was sweet. So it wasn't that the people were only drinking sweet wine. They just didn't know that their word smooth could be sort of, an alternative. So they had that little shortcut. And if we didn't discover that, it'll be port wines in that country only, So we've discovered that it wasn't necessarily the product issue, but rather language issue. And
talk about testing your hypothesis.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And we've also learned in the same study when talking about innovation that there's a whole new category of products that the client could go into simply because they were looking for, non-alcoholic versions that were portable and organic and with certain flavors. And that was not even the area that they were looking for. So when we find a nugget like that, they need to determine, are we going for this type of solution? Do we have the capacity to launch this new product? Or do we just let it go because it's too far from our core competencies? And that's the decision, that's the strategy that the company needs to sort of internally decide on.
Yeah, I love that. And definitely makes the case for going deeper in the research and really looking at it, sort of challenging your assumptions.
Yes.
On that topic of challenging your assumptions, we talked when we were prepping this about how we all get into different thought patterns, and it's really hard to break those thought patterns. So the next stage of this, I imagine, is, okay, we've got the research, we've pulled out the themes, we've got the insights. Now it's, what do we do with this stuff? And this is where most people just go, I have a hypothesis, let's brainstorm solutions. But let's say we've done this the right way, we've done everything that we've been talking about, and now we get to this point where it's like, okay, what do we do with this? Let's dive in and brainstorm this. How do you prime the people who are going to be doing this brainstorming to develop solutions to be challenging their own paradigms or breaking out of their own thought patterns?
This is one of our favorite elements of work, honestly, because when we think about it, there's at least 30,000 products launched every year. And the statistics of failures rather, 80 to 95% of the products fail in the market. That's a
Wow.
pretty big issue. So having the right process and being able to break predictable patterns. And we as humans, as I mentioned from the beginning, we unconsciously sort of repeat the patterns to begin with. So how do we sort of break that process? We have a specific type of solution, which is called Innovation by Design Workshop. And we leverage the elements of psychology, neuroscience, and design thinking to address specifically what you were alluding to, which is, try to make sure that people don't sort of fall in the trap of having the same predictable patterns. So the workshop is structured in such a way that there are sort of three phases. It's the information, sort of we ground everybody in what it is that we know or don't know. We then move into the inspiration. How do we get inspired? And inspired, could be from other categories, could be from arts, could be from music, could be from a variety of different sources. And then the last element is the innovation. So this is where we actually start thinking about what the product might look like. What's the real insights? What's the benefit? And why would the potential consumer believe that this product is actually going to do what you promised the product to do? And one of the most important things that we emphasize in the workshop is that people are open-minded, curious, non-judgmental, and just are there to play. And it's hard to do, right?
Yeah.
You go from meeting to meeting to meeting, right? And all of a sudden you're in the room with 12 other people. Many of them have a variety of different roles, and everybody sort of has the corporate persona, right?
So how do we break through that?
Exactly. So I do not have the influence on, who is in the room. Who are the skeptics? Who are the cynics? Who are the positive, thinkers here? So I cannot select the people that have specific personality traits, but instead I can open the situation and create the experience for them to have the specific psychological states that for the time being, for the 4 to 6 hours that we're in the room, you, in fact, neurochemically will become a little bit different, right? And it's so exciting. It is, it is just, you have the executives that all of a sudden are playful, play improv games that are really making them uncomfortable. And because of that, the whole atmosphere in the room changes. Could be anything from dance exercises, from physical exercises. Sometimes I ask people to, before coming into a workshop, to take a cold shower, because that actually changes the neurochemicals in the brain, and you have the release of dopamine that is for 4 to 6 hours, which is what I need in the room. I need people to be excited and open-minded. So it's all about sort of putting people in the right state of mind. And through all these exercises, people connect with one another. They're vulnerable. They do, in fact, change for that time being. And what ends up happening, not only they have much better ideas at the end of the session, but they become much closer with one another. I check in with clients after a workshop like that. All of a sudden, people are much more willing to ask for help. They're much more willing to sort of walk in to another person's office and say, oh, this worked great, but this didn't. Can you help me with this? The change in the team dynamics is incredible.
Yeah, I've seen that too with working out. That if you work out with colleagues or even with your boss, like it changes the dynamic of the relationship, makes
100%.
everybody much, much closer. It's a very quick way to bond people together.
Hugely. And exercise and even a simple walk, that's another element sort of the workshop, even for the time being, for 5 to 10 minutes, it changes the way you think. You're much more open-minded, and therefore the circulation of your body changes and of your brain changes as well, which is really quite exciting.
Yeah. Well, I like that idea of just a basic walk. Like, this doesn't have to be crazy stuff. You don't have to be playing Second City improv games, right? Or really,
we have that notes.
I mean, those are fun, right? But so I live in Chicago, as do you, and I have taken improv classes at Second City.
Yes.
And which, for those who don't know, is a big feeder to Saturday Night Live. It's all about improv and sketch comedy. And the basic level class, you're not on stage pretending to be a character. As the instructor said when he came in the first day, he said, we're going to spend the next 8 weeks learning the best drinking games you've ever played. It's really just games with sounds or movements where you're just reading and reacting off of the other person. You're basically just learning how to get out of your own head and into the room so that you're just paying attention to the group. But it's not, oh, you pretend to be a pregnant woman and you pretend to be a mechanic and you pretend. It's not that. So you don't have to go like super crazy with this stuff. You don't have to like take somebody to CrossFit to bond them together. Like, you could just get people and go for a walk. And you can almost, one of the questions I was going to ask is, what do you do with people who are really uncomfortable putting themselves out there? But I almost heard the answer in there. You can kind of Trojan horse it in some of these things that are really, really basic, but we know, and that they actually do bond people together.
Absolutely. And it's normal to be intimidated or fearful. It's a new experience for most, especially in the context of your own team. And all of a sudden you need to be courageous and vulnerable and be put on the spot unprepared, right?
Yeah.
So the exercises that we have are starting typically quite simple. Just to your point, making sure that people just walk around the room and sort of acknowledge one another, right? Or just high five, or just, do some sort of nodding. So it's just sort of connecting with one another. It starts really simple, but it can go as far as, putting somebody on the spot and saying, there's not a right or wrong answer, right? That sort of non-judgmental yes and, with let's build on ideas we have rather than try to scratch it. So that makes a big difference. And from the beginning, in the workshops, for example, we have is, I would say, you would be surprised to what we will pay attention to and what's going to be rewarded. So, for example, vulnerability and courage is going to be rewarded. And all of a sudden, and rewarded is just, you get a sticker, or you get a book, or you get something, experience afterwards.
Yeah.
Be surprised how quickly the room changes. All of a sudden, people want those things.
Yeah. It's amazing how many people will do crazy things for a free t-shirt or a free hat.
It's just that element of play. You just want to be outside of your own head and your self-critical thinking, which we all have, unfortunately, to just become somebody else and just play with one another. And it makes a big difference.
Yeah. Can you talk about the importance of liking each other?
Yes. Liking each other is always great. I have often worked with teams that really did not like each other. And that makes a big difference. You can literally feel the energy going into the room. And it's really interesting. So it's important to make sure that we, at least for the time being during the workshop, we facilitate and somehow break that pattern for the team. Liking each other is, the ultimate goal, but perhaps we can start even a step closer, which is you just need to be psychologically safe with one another, to express your opinions, to share what it is that you really think without being judged. I mean, this is not only important in context of professional relationships, it's important in family relationships. If you talk to a child and you would judge them for what they just said, they might not ever come back to you with that issue of same caliber, right? So it's the same thing in professional setting, making people feel heard and understood and respected is tremendously important. And if you get to the point of liking each other, it changes really a trajectory for that team. Because when you have sort of the more optimistic, more collaborative environment, the level of creativity, of innovation, it just skyrockets. So it is all very important into context of the culture, whether it's a corporate culture or a team dynamics, to really pay attention to it, to even create, I would call it microcultures or micro moments even, to have that connection, because ultimately everybody is going to benefit. Not only that, with that psychologically close connection, you feel good, you're healthier as a human being long term.
Yeah.
Relationships that they're negative or toxic, they can literally make you sick.
Yeah. I interviewed a woman, Megan Lally, on the show, who's the CEO of an advertising firm, High Dive. And they built their entire company around the concept that better relationships lead to better creative work. That was what that whole episode was. So if anyone wants to check that out, you can. But to your point, you don't have to like each other in the sense that you're all best friends, but you do have to have healthy relationships.
Yes.
Like having trust and respect and feeling safe and vulnerable, being willing to share with somebody. You don't have to be going out Friday nights and partying with them, but you have to have a good respect and relationship with those people. And that can supercharge creativity and collaboration.
100%.
Yeah. One question I have for you, we'll see how this relates, but anyone who has Disney Plus, do you have Disney Plus?
I do.
I have 2 young children, and so we have that. And on there is a documentary series called Inside Pixar. And it is these short documentaries. I think they're like 13 minutes long each. And it goes through all the different jobs within Pixar. And it covers the ones you think about: writer, director, animator. But it also covers like the woman who runs the cafeteria and the property manager and a bunch of other things. One of the things that really stood out to me as I was going through that is the thousands of people that influence a Pixar movie. And with a few exceptions, Pixar has just hit home run after home run after home run after home run. They had a little dip recently, but they've sort of picked it back up with Inside Out too. It just made me think that like the filter that their ideas are going through is so strong that just the best ideas get through. And that filter is lots of human beings and lots of human reactions. And I'm just curious, like, do you see that in your work as well? Does having a large team that trusts each other and can give that kind of feedback, does that large collaboration often lead to better results?
No doubt. It just changes the trajectory of the company. I've been lucky enough to, with my team, to be in environments that happen, and it works like magic. Because you don't have to, when you're working well together and the whole team or the company is deeply rooted in excellence, for example, or the values that are super important to them are shared by everybody. So when you're discussing ideas or solutions, you never criticize the other human, but rather try to propel the idea forward. And that sort of understanding makes such a big difference. And I have to admit that I would see more of the companies like that because it's so fun to work in environments like that. But what happens is everybody is open with one another. They're psychologically safe, sharing what their point of view is always, even if it makes the other person uncomfortable. Because at the end of the day, they trust each other enough that it's not personal. It's something very specific to the product that they're trying to get it better. So this makes a big difference.
Yeah, you really have to have a culture that is focused on putting the best thing out there.
Yes.
Because up until the very end, you need to be willing to take that feedback and go back and make changes. And that is it's hard to do, when
It
you
is
put
hard to
so much
do.
time into something. And people who listen to this know that I write on the side for fun. And a couple years ago, I wrote a novel, and I had written probably 3 or 4 full drafts of it before I ever showed it to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start getting other people's feedback.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, it's such a sinking feeling, even though I was reaching out to them asking for the feedback. Like, I knew I wanted to make this thing as good as I could. I knew I wanted it to be better. And I knew that the only way to do that was to get that feedback. And I'd still get the feedback and just go, oh, like this is going to be so much more work now. And even right at the end, you'd get like, oh, shoot, that part's still unclear. You got to go back and you got to change it. So it is really hard to do that as an individual. It's even harder to do that as a collective.
It's a grind. And as long as you are in it, knowing that it's a process, and with, design thinking specifically, it's all about the incremental changes as you move from one version of an idea to another. What often happens is companies have, that one shot, they try it, it doesn't work, they scratch the idea, a year later, another company picks up that idea from exactly where it was, tweaks is just enough, and has a winner.
Explodes. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is always that sort of patience with development and designing and fine tuning as you move along.
Well, that's what I was thinking when you were talking about the coffee maker business, that I was like, kudos to them for going back to the well 3 times to try to make it work. Because most companies would not do that. Just be like, well, that doesn't work.
Exactly. While they still had the sort of the preconceived notion, or the original preconceived notion that was incorrect in a way, they were open to listen and open to try something different. And they are doing very well.
Yeah. I would imagine too, back to having it be fun and liking the people you're doing it with, like that would seem like a little bit of an antidote to getting burned out in this process. Because I could see if you feel like every piece of feedback is a critique, I could see how that would burn you out, and you'd finally throw up your hands and go, just ship it. It's fine. Like, and that's how you get stuff that's lackluster. But if you're like, hey, we're just having fun here, and we're trying to make this thing as cool as it can be. And we got another piece of feedback. That's another opportunity. And yeah, we got a deadline coming, but like what's important is the quality. And if you kind of have that mindset and can keep that playfulness, it would seem like that's an antidote to burnout.
Makes a huge difference. And one of the ways to think about it, and we've all been in that situation in school where you were critiqued, on a paper or an assignment, and it just crushed your soul, right? And instead, there's a great scientist, Carol Dweck, is focused on understanding growth mindset. If you just looked at it in the way like you're not there yet, but you have made a progress already. And we already know from research that people are much more likely to try many, many more times, or much more successful down the road. So if we could all incorporate that mindset with one another, it would probably change the trajectory of, innovation for that team, but also of the quality of the relationship within.
Yeah. Be patient, people, and have fun with your work.
That's it.
Want to ask you a question, because we've been talking a lot about products here. A lot of the listeners here are not delivering products, but I wanted to have you on because I think this type of process is really helpful for any type of design. So
yes,
how, if at all, would people adjust this to be thinking about building employee experiences or services that they're offering, or developing a team to go solve a problem in the market? Any comments in how you can change this from sort of hard product more to service or experience?
It is, we have employed this. I was referring quite a bit to the products to make them tangible for people to understand how that might look like. But it absolutely, the framework works the same way for experiences. and for services specifically. So it is really important, number one, to understand the consumer and understand the frustration, for example, with the service somebody might have. And it's essentially the same process as you follow. You're just looking for the insight, except it's a little bit of a different because you change the element of the experience rather than the specific product features, which is no problem at all. But you move from the element of, you move towards the element, the human element, right? Which is, how do you strengthen the relationships, the employee experiences, for example? What can you do to make sure that an employee is much happier within a company and much more fulfilled? And in that area, we would actually pull in the elements of science and academic research that already exist, because there is a lot of research that's been already conducted and collected. And, we can pull in the elements of what's been already done and infuse it specifically to the elements of service and elements of the experience that the client might want to potentially change. But the framework overall absolutely applies, whether it's a product or a service. It's just sort of a different shift in sort of the mindset that you might want to follow.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Mag, this has been a lot of fun. I love this topic. And I think, to the point there at the end, I think these are frameworks that might seem a little daunting to people at the beginning, but if you just simplify them down, how do we ask better questions before we really define our problems and start working on them? How do we get good at defining the problem? How do we prime people to be a little bit more creative if we're going to sit down and start to create solutions? I just think if you just take one or two of these things away and start to implement them, you can create much, much better outcomes down the road. So really appreciate you coming on. We will put links to you and to Clarteza and to everything else we talked about in the show notes. Any final words of wisdom for the audience?
I would say there is one area that people often get wrong, and that is that we are either creative or innovative or we're not. And that is not the case. All of us are innately creative, and creativity and innovation is more of a verb rather than a description. We can all follow the process of becoming better in problem solving by doing simple things like physical activity, by getting inspired to build the library of knowledge so you can cross-pollinate, different ideas in your mind, unplugging, experiencing different things to make sure that you are in a different mindset for innovation. So there's a lot of things that individuals can do. And the reason I say that, when we go into the workshop and I ask who in the room is creative, there are just very few people that raise their hands. And many would say, no, we're not creative. And when I challenge and say, when did you decide you're not creative? It's typically very early, 5, 7 year olds, 10 years old. And
so sad.
It's just sad because, what happens in that room all of a sudden is, the vulnerabilities come to light and people really realize it's been 30 years. It's time to let this go. Clearly, I am creative. And in fact, that's another thing that I wanted to emphasize. Creative expression and problem solving and innovation, it's an essential element of human happiness. And on top of that, it's a protective factor in resilience. So not a lot of people realize that what, O'Brien, you do, which is, writing, it's actually making you more resilient. What your wife's done with dancing is actually a protective factor in making her much more happy. So all of us, it should be almost mandatory to creative expression in our lives, whether it's in a group setting in the workshop, which is the one highlight that I get to see periodically and see the laughter and the excitement that the room is in after the experience like that.
Well, here's a final challenge for everybody. If you're feeling like maybe you're not a little creative, is after this pop some music on, give a little dance, get a little bit of that healing. Doesn't matter how silly, doesn't matter who's watching. Just bop your head a little bit and bring your creativity out. We'll end with that. Mag, thank you so much. Everybody out there, go be creative.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.